Skirk is coming up soon, which got me thinking about how lame it would be if she ended up having a normal vision. So today I wanted to make a case for adding the quantum and imaginary elements to Genshin Impact, explaining why I think they would spice up the game, and why I personally believe that they'd be an extremely welcome addition to Teyvat. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So in my last video about my wishlist for Genshin's 2025, I mentioned how I would like them to add the imaginary and quantum elements to Genshin Impact, and I just thought to myself, that's worth its own video because there's a whole lot to unpack here. So, first things first, the main reason I would want them to add this element is because of characters like Skirk and Dainslef and anybody else who is of that vein, because I think it would be extremely boring if characters like that had a normal vision. You can't tell me that we wait years and years for Dainslef to come out, we finally roll around to his release, and we're gonna be all fine and dandy if he has like a hydro vision or whatever. It doesn't even matter if the kit's good, that will just be so disappointing. It would not fit, like, at all. Especially when you consider that Dainslef is an extremely anti-Archons, anti-Celestia person, and I assume that the later and later we get into Genshin's endgame, you know, in terms of a story and such, and we meet more and more of these abyssal characters and celestial characters and all the like, it would just be really weird for them to have normal visions. Now, sure, it'll make sense for some of them to have elemental powers. I'm sure that the celestial characters that are way down the line will probably have elemental powers, considering that I believe they're the ones that are ordaining the visions. At least not the Hydro Vision. I know that Nouvelette takes care of those now, but whenever the dragon doesn't have full authority, I'm pretty sure Celestia is the one that gives out the visions. However, it's for that reason that characters like Skirk and Dainslef shouldn't have one. I've heard some people say that Skirk looks like a cryo character, and while I can see the vision because her design is predominantly white, okay, that checks out, I still don't really feel like it would fit. I think she would work much better as like an abyssal character or a quantum character. I think quantum matches her aesthetic wonderfully, especially because the first time I saw Skirk, I was like, wow, she looks like a Honkai Star Rail character. She doesn't even look that much like a Genshin character. They did a very good job at making her look otherworldly, but that's exactly why I would like them to commit to that. It wouldn't really make sense for her to be like an Electro, because I would say from first glance, if we had to assign her a vision, Hydro because of Child, Electro because of Child, or Cryo because she's mostly white. Like, you can't tell me that when we get to Conria, you know, the region where it was completely run by humanity, zero reliance on Celestia, and I bet we're going to visit the region at some point. Probably just the ruins of it, but I do assume there'll be a patch cycle with it at some stage. You can't tell me that those characters would have visions. You know, the ones that hate the Archons? Heavily doubt it. So that's my biggest reason for having these elements in Genshin. Secondly, it would be to spice up the combat. And I say this because, do we all remember when Dendro came out? That was a lot of fun. Everything was so new, nothing was discovered yet, and throughout the entire Sumeru patch cycle, every character release was really interesting and dynamic because we were trying to figure out, okay, which Dendro reaction do they work with best? You know, how do they utilize it best? Figuring out different things about different Dendro teams, and lots of different characters getting buffed because of Dendro. It like entirely revived Electro as an element, which before was a very, very poorly performing one. Listen, you had to have been there for the era when there were people that unironically ran physical Keqing. That's how bad Keqing was. Her physical build was genuinely competitive with her Electro build pre-Dendro. That's how bad Keqing mains were coping. Dendro was their savior. And Dendro on the whole opened up this entirely new way to play, you know, this whole new genre of playstyle, a very easy to access, free-to-play friendly selection of team options that are really, really easy to put together. Not to mention how, with the exceptions of characters like Alhaitham that have a very layered kit that can indeed become quite complex, most Dendro characters are very, very easy to play. You cannot tell me that a Nilou Bloom team is hard to execute. There's hardly even a rotation, it's just ability spam. And that worked very well because there is in fact a large audience for that type of thing. And listen, I'm not even that much of a Dendro fan. I don't like Dendro that much. Well, to be more specific, I don't like EM-based Dendro. I don't like low-investment Dendro. I like high-investment Dendro of Kinich and Emily and whatnot. So I'm not even a big Dendro fan, but you have to admit that when it was coming out, it was very, very interesting and added a whole new different layer to combat for us to explore. So I think that by adding in Imaginary and Quantum, that would once again totally make combat feel more interesting again, because it's more than just a regional gimmick, because those are cool, they work, fine, but a new element, now that is just a whole different world. We saw how Dendro was able to change the makeup of Genshin Impact's meta. So imagine these two elements being introduced at the same time, assuming that it's not like Geo and that they do actually have reactions, and how it would completely shake things up. Imagine how many old characters are there that could absolutely use a buff, or a playstyle change, or just something of the sort. Because you have to understand, you had to have been there to truly appreciate how bad Keqing was. It is insane how garbage that unit was. She was awful. Very, very few redeeming qualities. Terrible character. However, Dendro somehow made her decent. She actually became a good unit, and to this day, Keqing remains as a very, very competent free-to-play friendly official driver. Now imagine the possibilities with two new elements that have their own unique set of qualities. It's been brought to my attention in my comments too that the next region we're going to isn't Snezhnaya. Well, it's a part of Snezhnaya, but it's not Snezhnaya directly. We're going to the Nordkrei. And then I remembered that Lieben did in fact tell us about that place. I just assumed that he was talking about like a town or a location there. But no, apparently Nordkrei is its own region. So that's going to be a quote-unquote filler region. I really don't know what they're doing with that. It could be a banger, I don't really know what's up there. But I think that would be a perfect time to introduce Quantum and Imaginary, because if that does end up being like a filler region, it would give us something really interesting to focus on. I do say that, but let's be realistic, if they were to add in these elements, they would probably only add them in like 2 years from now, which is a shame because I feel like the sooner the better. It took 2 full patch cycles since the game's release for us to get Dendro. Ever since then, it's been 2 full years, a little over that, since we've gotten Dendro. 2 and a bit! That's quite a long time without a new element or a new crazy gimmick. And there are the individual region gimmicks, sure, but they're never really gonna match up to, you know, adding a full element. The best way that I can compare it, for any Pokemon fans here, there's Mega Evolution, which is the best, you know, generation gimmick that they have ever made in any Pokemon game, and then everything else that came after that just felt kinda lame because it wasn't Mega Evolution. Now granted, I did quite enjoy Fontaine's HP loss mechanics. Everybody being able to use Mayonnaise Hunters was really, really interesting. I quite liked the kits they came up with, but there were some times where they just tried to kinda throw gimmicks in there and it didn't really make any sense. Ah yes, I love Siegewene's Bond of Life passive. HP loss was indeed interesting because it made healers relevant, and if you were there for the time where healers were considered just kinda whatever, then you probably remember how initially jarring it was for healers to suddenly become these amazing, great characters that you absolutely want to have built on your account, because before it was just kinda like, oh, well, enemies don't really hit hard enough. If you can dodge, you can just kind of get away without one. They're more or less a damage loss, always. Just avoid them if you can. Use a shielder if you really have to. Whereas nowadays, it's, okay, you need fanfare. Use a healer. So it would be very reductive of me to say that Fontaine didn't bring anything interesting, because it absolutely did. I do think that HP loss was cool. But then you come to Notlan, and I'm gonna be honest, Night Soul just feels like a restriction bar. It's just there to restrict the units to certain teams. I don't really think it has any other purpose. It's cool for exploration, but that's pretty much it. Night Soul is the Dynamaxing of Genshin gimmicks. If it was up to me, I would make Quantum and Imaginary very high investment elements, more leaning on the hypercarry side, buffing hypercarry characters, main DPS characters, rewarding high crit builds, because they would be an endgame element. We have Dendro as the really, really easily accessible element, we have all the other ones which are normal, then make Quantum and Imaginary, because they'd be added in around the endgame, the really, really high investment ones. I think that would be very interesting. And here's the thing, it can be used so creatively. Now, they take inspiration from the real world when it comes to coming up with elemental reactions. What the heck do you do with Quantum and Imaginary? You just gotta make something up. You gotta imagine something, if you will. Haha, very funny. So there's no telling what they would be able to make with that, and I just think that's very, very interesting. It would be a very unpredictable addition to the game, and I know what some of you might be thinking. No Quantum and Imaginary, I don't like sci-fi, I don't want it to be related to Honkai 3rd or Honkai Star Rail at all. Well, here's the thing, they don't have to be called Quantum and Imaginary, they don't really have to be called those specific elements, they could be different. Just 2 elements in the vein of like Abyssal and Evil, and Light Celestial, that sort of thing. Nobody's saying that it absolutely has to be like that. And besides, I would say that Quantum and Imaginary, those 2 statements, Imaginary is a word in the dictionary. Sure, it's related to Honkai Impact 3rd and Honkai Star Rail in the sense that that's where Hoyoverse got the idea from, but they do XPs all the time, and they usually drastically change the characters between the games as well, so I don't really see how this would be any different. Think about it. can you tell me that Wendy from Honkai 3rd is the same as Venti from Genshin Impact? One is a side character that got off-screened, the other is part of one of the most lore-important factions in their respective game. Or even look at the Raidens. Raiden Mei is very different from Raiden Shogun, who's very different from Acheron. They all have their own very distinct personalities. Or even Zila from Honkai Star Rail. She's very different from Honkai Impact 3rd Zila. The only character in the entire Hoyoverse who is literally just the same guy is Welt. He is the only guy in this entire Hoyoverse that is completely consistent. Everything else tends to change between games, so it doesn't really have to be sci-fi, it doesn't really have to be something specific just because it's quantum or imaginary. Genshin can obviously put their own spin on it, because they've put their own spin on pretty much everything that they've added to the game thus far. And Genshin does a very good job with their original non-XP characters. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Farina's inspired by absolutely nothing in the Hoyoverse. She's an original character, she was made for Genshin Impact by Genshin Impact people, right? And that is a really great character with a really great story, an amazing kit, and all the works, right? So I trust their creativity. And it just fits with the Hoyoverse on the whole. So what do I mean by this? Well, here's the thing. The Abyss is evil, right? Well, okay, there's a lot you can say about that. There's a lot to unpack there if you're a lore person. Debatable, I know, but for the sake of this video, we'll go with the umbrella term of evil. Antagonists, they're against us, right? The Abyss is against us. And then you've got Quantum. So I'm not a Honkai Impact 3rd lore expert. Anything I know about the game, I've asked my best friend about it, and he's just told me because I asked him. But from what I know, Quantum is like the evil element of the Hoyoverse, and Imaginary is the good element of the Hoyoverse. There's the Imaginary Tree, which is all of the good stuff, all the goodies, you know, it stores all the worlds and stuff. And then Quantum is the evil hell world, or something to do with that. So adding Quantum, which already fits with Skirk's aesthetic, the Abyss's aesthetic, just everything to do with the sort of underworld of Genshin Impact, I think it would make a whole lot of sense. It wouldn't really feel like it came out of nowhere, because the Abyss is already such a pre-established foe or enemy in the world of Genshin, and Quantum is already seen as this evil, bad, malignant force that seeks to destroy the Imaginary Tree. I forget the details, but I know that it has very bad intentions. So, with the Abyss, like I said, there's a whole lot to unpack there. I'm not gonna get into all of it, so it's debatable, perhaps, whether it would actually fit or not. If you're a big lore nerd, and you think that Quantum would have absolutely zero place in Genshin, you are more than welcome to correct me. And then with Imaginary, I think it would fit so well into the Hoyoverse, because we already have the Akasha Tree, we already have something kind of similar to it. So the Akasha Tree, in Genshin's context at least, it stores the entire world's memories, the entire world's dreams, the entire world's everything, right? We all played the Sumeru Archon Quest, and if you haven't played it yet, you'll get there eventually, you'll see what I mean. So I don't see why Imaginary wouldn't actually fit. You see, it would be the good element, the pure one. So in the future, when we do eventually travel to Celestia, and if we ever get a patch cycle in Celestia, which I'm actually not sure if we're gonna do that, I do think we'll get characters from Celestia in the future. I do absolutely think that at some stage, we'll be able to play angel characters, or characters that are part of the Heavenly Principles, or that are involved with them at least. I don't know if we're gonna have a patch cycle there, but I do think we'll eventually play those types of characters. I think Imaginary would be a pretty good element for them. Or, if they even wanted to completely subvert our expectations, and be like, surprise! The Abyss are actually the good guys. Then it's as simple as reversing it. Give Imaginary to the Abyss, and give Quantum to the people from Celestia. And that way, you can denote the good and evil pretty badly, and you get your whole plot twist thing. Now, we'll have to wait and see how the rest of Genshin's plot unfolds. It could be very realistic that the further on we go, the more I'll realize, okay, never mind, this wouldn't fit at all. But lore-wise, I don't really see why it couldn't work. And either way, does it really need to have a lore reason? I do think that just adding the elements and saying our power comes from an otherworldly source, most people would be happy with that. I don't think that there's anything particularly egregious with just saying, oh yeah, I'm from the Abyss, so I have otherworldly powers. That checks out. They're from another world. I don't really think we need more explanation than that. It's in the Hoyoverse. We understand that there are other worlds in this sort of grander connected Hoyoverse, so it makes sense. But that's just my opinion. Maybe you're a big lore nerd and all of that just made you, like, go, juice, what did you just say? That was horrendously wrong. Then you're more than welcome to correct me. And once again, I don't think that it has to be related to Honkai Impact 3rd specifically, or Honkai Star Rail specifically. I trust that they'd be able to put their own spin on it. Also, everyone, I'm posting this on New Year's Eve, and you may be watching this on January 1st or January 2nd or later on, but either way, I would like to take a moment to say Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful New Year celebration. I'm really looking forward to, enjoying the New Year's. I've got some resolutions packed up. I'm ready to go forward and charge ahead into 2025. We're halfway through this decade now, which just feels crazy. I can't believe that we're already halfway through the 2020s. I really want to extend a huge, warm, grateful thank you to everybody who's been watching my videos up until this point. Thank you so much for your support. It would not be possible for me to make videos and do daily uploads and provide you with content if there was no one around to watch them. I love making videos, and I love that you're willing to watch them. Really thank you for always taking the time out of your day to see, okay, what's Juice posted, what is she up to, and watching the videos. It really means the world to me. And even if you're a first-time viewer and you've just stumbled across this video randomly and you haven't been watching me for that long, well, Happy New Year to you too. And thank you so much for watching. I really am grateful, genuinely. And I just wish all of you the happiest New Year possible and enjoy the rest of the holiday season while it lasts. I feel like it's been so long since we've gotten Dendro at this stage. A bombshell element that nobody's expecting would be a whole lot of fun for everyone. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the idea of naming the new elements after Quantum and Imaginary specifically, I'd say that the idea of new elements in general for these abyssal type characters is something that we can all agree on. But let me know about your thoughts down below. What do you personally think about this idea? Is there anything that you'd change about it? I'd love to know. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel for those of you who are interested. Go head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I personally think that Genshin needs Quantum and Imaginary. This has been Juice, signing out, and I sincerely hope that you all get whatever you're wishing for in 2025.